The SVP just finished presenting my 18-month merger analysis to the board, claiming full credit while calling me just operations support. I'm walking back to my cubicle when my phone buzzes with a text from the acquiring company's CEO. Brilliant analysis. Thanks for sending it directly. My blood freezes. I never sent anything to him. Someone leaked confidential information using my work, and now I'm about to become the scapegoat for corporate espionage. The $3 billion deal everyone's celebrating is built on stolen intelligence. 6 months earlier, I had no idea my life was about to become a corporate thriller. My name is Alethea, and I worked as a senior operations analyst at Meridian Financial Corp in downtown Chicago. The Willis Tower cast its shadow over our building every afternoon, reminding me daily that bigger opportunities existed just blocks away. I'd been grinding there for 4 years since graduating from Northwestern with my finance degree, always hearing the same refrain when promotion discussions arose: "You're more valuable in operations." My corner cubicle on the 32nd floor overlooked Michigan Avenue, and I decorated it with a small succulent and my Northwestern diploma. The plant was thriving better than my career prospects. Every morning I'd arrive at 7:30, grab coffee from the lobby Starbucks, and dive into spreadsheets that would make most people's eyes glaze over. Numbers were my language patterns, my playground. Living alone in my Lincoln Park apartment, I spent evenings reviewing financial reports while my neighbors enjoyed rooftop parties. My student loan payments consumed a significant chunk of my salary, but I'd managed to save enough for a small emergency fund. The dream was breaking into investment banking, maybe landing a position at one of the prestigious firms in the Loop. Every rejection email felt like another door slamming shut, but I refused to give up. My relationship with Daniel had become collateral damage in my career obsession. He worked downtown too in tech consulting, and we'd met at a Northwestern alumni mixer 2 years prior. Sweet guy, patient with my work schedule, but even his understanding had limits. Our last conversation replayed in my mind constantly. "You care more about those spreadsheets than us," he'd said, packing his things from my apartment. Maybe he was right. Then Marcus Blackwell changed everything. The senior vice president of strategic development strode into our department one Tuesday morning in March, his custom-tailored suit and commanding presence instantly shifting the room's energy. Marcus had joined Meridian 18 months earlier from Goldman Sachs, bringing Wall Street sophistication to our Midwest operation. His reputation for closing complex deals preceded him, and rumor was he'd personally saved the company $40 million in his first year. Standing beside my desk, Marcus explained the assignment with barely contained excitement. Project Sapphire, he called it. Meridian was considering acquiring Pinnacle Industries, a renewable energy company based in Denver, for approximately $3 billion. The potential merger would position Meridian as a major player in clean technology, diversifying beyond traditional financial services. "This could be your big break into the strategy team," Marcus promised, his blue eyes sparkling with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. "I need someone with your analytical precision to evaluate Pinnacle's true worth. The board expects comprehensive financial modeling, competitive analysis, and integration planning. Think you can handle something this significant?" My heart raced. Finally, recognition for my skills. I accepted immediately, already envisioning the complex models I'd build, the insights I'd uncover. Marcus handed me a thick folder of preliminary materials and a signed authorization granting access to confidential databases. "Work directly with me on this," he instructed. "Report your progress weekly, and remember, absolute discretion is essential." The following months became a blur of 80-hour weeks. I dissected Pinnacle's financial statements line by line, analyzed their patent portfolio, evaluated their manufacturing capabilities, and modeled integration scenarios. The renewable energy sector fascinated me especially, Pinnacle's innovative wind turbine technology and their extensive intellectual property holdings. My social life evaporated completely. Weekend plans became spreadsheet sessions. Evening gym visits transformed into database queries. I ordered takeout to the office so frequently that the Thai restaurant downstairs knew my preferences by heart. The sacrifice felt worthwhile, though, because I was discovering something remarkable about Pinnacle Industries. Hidden within their seemingly modest revenue figures lay extraordinary value. Their renewable energy patents, acquired through strategic partnerships with 3 major universities, represented breakthrough technologies in wind and solar efficiency. Conservative estimates suggested these patents alone were worth $800 million, yet Pinnacle's market valuation reflected only $2 billion. The merger wasn't just financially sound, it was brilliant. Working late became my routine, often staying until 10 or 11 at night. The office cleaning crew and I developed a friendly rapport, and security guards no longer questioned my presence. I felt like a detective uncovering buried treasure, each analysis revealing new layers of Pinnacle's potential. Marcus scheduled weekly check-ins to review my progress, always expressing satisfaction with my thoroughness. He'd lean back in his leather chair, nodding approvingly as I presented preliminary findings. "Excellent work, Alethea. This level of analysis is exactly what the board needs to make informed decisions. Your attention to detail is impressive." The praise felt incredible after years of being overlooked. For the first time since joining Meridian, I felt genuinely valued, like my skills mattered beyond routine operational tasks. Marcus often mentioned how this project would showcase my capabilities to senior leadership, potentially opening doors to strategy roles I'd dreamed about. But something nagged at me during those weekly meetings. Marcus asked unusually specific questions about my methodology, requesting copies of my preliminary models and analysis frameworks. He claimed it was for backup purposes and quality assurance, which seemed reasonable given the project's importance. Still, his interest in my process, rather than just my conclusions, struck me as odd. 3 months into the project, I decided to grab coffee with Sarah from legal to discuss regulatory implications of the merger. Sarah and I had maintained a casual friendship since my first year at Meridian, bonding over shared frustrations with corporate bureaucracy and our mutual love of true crime podcasts. She was smart, ambitious, and refreshingly honest about office politics. We met at the little cafe in the lobby, ordering our usual lattes while discussing weekend plans. Sarah seemed distracted, though fidgeting with her coffee cup and glancing around nervously. When I mentioned Project Sapphire, her expression shifted noticeably. "Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you about that," she said quietly, leaning across the small table. "Marcus has been asking me questions about your background, your work habits, your previous projects. He specifically requested that I monitor your access to certain databases and report back on your research patterns." The words hit me like cold water. Why would he need monitoring reports on my work, I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the growing unease. Sarah looked uncomfortable, clearly regretting bringing up the subject. "He said someone with your background needs supervision on a project this sensitive. He mentioned concerns about attention to detail and suggested you might need additional oversight to ensure quality standards." My background. The phrase stung because I knew exactly what it meant. I hadn't attended an Ivy League school like most strategy team members. My father worked construction. My mother taught elementary school. I'd earned my Northwestern degree through academic scholarships and part-time jobs, not family connections or inherited wealth. Apparently, Marcus viewed my working-class origins as a liability requiring surveillance. The revelation shattered my naive excitement about finally being recognized for my abilities. Instead of seeing potential, Marcus saw someone who needed watching. Instead of trusting my skills, he was collecting evidence of my inadequacy. The weekly meetings weren't progress reviews, they were intelligence-gathering sessions. I finished my coffee mechanically, thanking Sarah for her honesty, while my mind raced with implications. Walking back to my desk, I noticed things differently. The way Marcus's assistant, Jennifer, always seemed to appear whenever I accessed sensitive files. How certain colleagues had grown distant since I'd started Project Sapphire. The subtle changes in how people interacted with me. Sitting in my cubicle that afternoon, staring at months of meticulous analysis, I realized I'd been played from the beginning. This wasn't my big break into strategy. This was an elaborate test with Marcus collecting data to prove I wasn't qualified for advancement. Every late night, every sacrificed weekend, every detailed model I'd created was being used to build a case against me. But why go to such elaborate lengths? If Marcus wanted to keep me in operations, he could simply decline to promote me. Why assign a critical project while simultaneously documenting my supposed inadequacies? What was his real agenda with Project Sapphire? That evening, alone in my apartment, with takeout containers scattered across my coffee table, I made a decision that would change everything. If Marcus wanted to monitor my work, I'd give him something worth watching. But first I needed to understand exactly what game he was playing and why my success threatened him enough to orchestrate such an elaborate deception. The investigation I was about to undertake would reveal corruption that reached far beyond one insecure SVP. It would expose a conspiracy that threatened not just my career, but the integrity of the entire merger. And it would ultimately give me the power to bring down the very people who tried to destroy me. The next morning, I arrived at the office with a different mindset entirely. Instead of diving straight into Pinnacle analysis, I spent time observing patterns I'd previously ignored. Who had access to what information? Which meetings happened behind closed doors? How did document flow through our department? My systems access as senior operations analyst was broader than most people realized. 4 years of building relationships with IT support meant I understood our network architecture better than many managers. I began tracing digital footprints following document trails through shared drives and email systems. What I discovered made my stomach turn. Marcus had been sharing preliminary versions of my analysis with external consultants, billing them through a company called Blackwell Strategic Advisory. The invoices buried in administrative expense reports showed payments of $50,000 to $75,000 for competitive intelligence services. My months of unpaid overtime were generating substantial revenue for Marcus's side business, but the corruption ran deeper. Cross-referencing client lists from Blackwell Strategic Advisory with Meridian's recent merger targets revealed a disturbing pattern. Every major acquisition discussion over the past 18 months had corresponding consulting contracts with the target companies. Marcus wasn't just selling my current work, he'd been monetizing inside information on multiple deals. The paper trail led me to Pinnacle Industries' vendor payments database, accessible through our due diligence authorization. There it was in black and white. Pinnacle had been paying Blackwell Strategic Advisory for competitive intelligence services since 14 months ago, long before Meridian's official interest in acquiring them. My hands trembled as I printed the evidence. Marcus had been playing both sides from the beginning. Meridian paid him to evaluate acquisition targets, while those same targets paid his consulting firm for insider information about Meridian's strategy. He was essentially selling them intelligence on how to defend against or manipulate the very deals he was supposed to be facilitating. But why assign me to Project Sapphire if he already had established revenue streams from Pinnacle? The answer emerged as I dug deeper into email communications and meeting schedules. Marcus's plan was far more sophisticated than simple double billing. He intended to sabotage the merger at the last possible moment using insider information to identify weaknesses in Meridian's position. Then Blackwell Strategic Advisory would swoop in to broker a renegotiated deal, earning massive fees from both sides while positioning Marcus as the hero who salvaged a failed merger. The timeline was already in motion. Marcus had scheduled meetings with Pinnacle executives for the week following Meridian's board presentation, ostensibly to discuss integration planning. In reality, he planned to offer Pinnacle access to Meridian's final terms and negotiating positions through his consulting firm. My role in this scheme was becoming clear. Marcus needed comprehensive analysis to identify Pinnacle's true value and Meridian's strategic vulnerabilities. But he also needed a scapegoat when the deal collapsed. Someone whose working-class background and operational role made her a believable source of analytical errors or procedural mistakes. The monitoring Sarah had described wasn't quality assurance, it was evidence collection. Marcus was building a file of my research methods database queries and preliminary conclusions to demonstrate how an inexperienced analyst had misvalued the target company. When the merger failed, he'd blame my incompetence while secretly orchestrating a more profitable alternative. Staying late that evening, I expanded my investigation into Marcus's professional history. His LinkedIn profile boasted about successful deals at Goldman Sachs, but a deeper search revealed some troubling details. 2 of his supposedly successful transactions had been investigated by the SEC for insider trading, though no charges were filed. His departure from Goldman coincided with a firm-wide compliance review of conflict of interest violations. Even more disturbing, I found evidence that Marcus had used similar schemes at his previous positions. Former colleagues at 2 different firms had posted vague warnings on industry forums about unethical practices involving competitive intelligence and deal manipulation. The pattern was clear. Marcus was a serial corporate criminal who'd perfected his methods over years of practice. But the most shocking discovery came accidentally while copying files late one night. Jennifer Marcus's assistant had accidentally forwarded me an email meant for Marcus himself. The message was brief, but revealing. Meeting with Patricia confirmed for Thursday. She's ready to implement the position adjustments we discussed. Remind me to transfer the Cayman account documentation to the shared drive. Jennifer Richardson. I'd always assumed she was just another administrative assistant, efficient but unremarkable. The email signature on the misdirected message told a different story. Jennifer Blackwell Richardson, Executive Assistant to SVP Strategic Development. She wasn't just Marcus's assistant. She was his wife, using her maiden name professionally to hide their relationship. This wasn't an innocent administrative error. It was evidence of a coordinated conspiracy using Jennifer's access to confidential information across multiple departments. My investigation took on new urgency. If Jennifer had been operating under false pretenses for over a year, what other information had she accessed? Her employee profile showed database permissions spanning HR, legal, finance, and strategic development. She could access salary information, legal documents, financial projections, and strategic plans across the entire company. Cross-referencing Jennifer's system access with Marcus's consulting clients revealed the full scope of their operation. She'd been systematically collecting confidential information from every department, feeding intelligence to Marcus for his various schemes. Performance reviews, strategic initiatives, merger discussions, personnel changes, everything Meridian considered proprietary was potentially compromised. The realization that I'd been working under surveillance by a married couple running corporate espionage operations made me physically ill. Every conversation with Jennifer, every document I'd shared, every casual comment about project timelines had been intelligence gathering for their criminal enterprise. But discovering their marriage also provided leverage. If Jennifer was using fraudulent identity information in her employment that constituted grounds for immediate termination and potential prosecution. More importantly, it proved Marcus had been deceiving Meridian about conflicts of interest from his first day of employment. Over the following weeks, I carefully documented every aspect of their operation. Marcus's consulting contracts, Jennifer's inappropriate access patterns, their coordination on information sharing, and the timeline of their schemes. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed to understand the full network before taking action. That understanding came when I traced the Patricia mentioned in Jennifer's misdirected email. Patricia Hoffman, board member and managing director of Hoffman Capital Partners. She sat on Meridian's board while simultaneously managing an investment fund that had taken strategic positions in every company Marcus had targeted for acquisition. The conspiracy wasn't just about Marcus and Jennifer skimming consulting fees. They were working with a board member to manipulate merger discussions for investment profit. Patricia would use her board position to influence deal timing and terms, while her investment fund profited from advanced knowledge of acquisition plans. Looking at Hoffman Capital Partners' portfolio, the pattern was unmistakable. They'd accumulated significant positions in Pinnacle Industries starting 13 months ago, long before Meridian's official interest. If the merger proceeded at the terms I'd recommended, Patricia's fund stood to earn approximately $40 million. But if the deal collapsed and Pinnacle's stock price dropped, they could buy additional shares cheaply before Marcus brokered a renegotiated merger at higher terms. The potential profit from that scenario exceeded $100 million, more than enough to justify elaborate schemes involving corporate espionage and board manipulation. I was trapped in the middle of a conspiracy involving securities fraud, insider trading, corporate espionage, and breach of fiduciary duty. Marcus, Jennifer, and Patricia had turned Meridian's merger strategy into their personal ATM, with me serving as both the analytical engine and the designated scapegoat. The weight of what I'd discovered was overwhelming. These weren't just unethical business practices, they were serious federal crimes that could result in decades of prison time. And I was the person who could expose everything if I was brave enough to take on powerful people with everything to lose. But first, I needed to understand how deep the corruption went and whether other Meridian executives were involved. Because if this conspiracy included additional board members or senior management, my evidence might not be enough to ensure justice. I might just be painting a target on my back while the real criminals walked away unscathed. What I discovered next would test every assumption I had about corporate integrity and personal safety. The conspiracy was about to become personal, and the stakes were higher than I ever imagined. My investigation into Patricia Hoffman's investment activities revealed a criminal network spanning multiple companies and regulatory violations. Using publicly available SEC filings and cross-referencing them with Meridian's deal history, I uncovered a systematic pattern of insider trading that had been operating for nearly 3 years. Hoffman Capital Partners hadn't just profited from Pinnacle Industries. They'd taken strategic positions in 7 different companies that subsequently became Meridian acquisition targets. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. Patricia was using her board position to front-run merger announcements generating profits while betraying her fiduciary responsibilities to Meridian shareholders. But the scheme was even more sophisticated than simple insider trading. Patricia's fund would take initial positions in target companies, then Marcus's consulting firm would approach those same companies, offering competitive intelligence services. The intelligence would include detailed information about Meridian's acquisition criteria, timeline preferences, and negotiating strategies. Armed with inside information, target companies could manipulate their financial reporting and strategic positioning to make themselves more attractive acquisition candidates. They could time product announcements, adjust revenue recognition, or restructure debt to optimize their appeal to Meridian. This artificial enhancement of target company value inflated acquisition prices, directly benefiting Patricia's investment positions. The consulting fees Marcus collected were just the visible portion of their profits. The real money came from Patricia's investment gains, which were then shared through a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts. I traced payments flowing from Hoffman Capital Partners through Bermuda holding companies to accounts controlled by both Marcus and Jennifer. The shell company structure was remarkably sophisticated, clearly designed by professionals with experience in financial crimes. Multiple layers of corporate ownership obscured the money trail, making it difficult for regulators to connect Patricia's investment profits to Marcus's consulting activities. They'd created plausible deniability while systematically looting Meridian's strategic planning process. My analysis of their financial flows revealed another disturbing element. The amounts being stolen were substantial enough to affect Meridian's acquisition strategy. Overpaying for target companies by 10 to 15% might seem insignificant in individual deals, but across multiple transactions, it represented hundreds of millions in shareholder value destruction. Even worse, I discovered evidence suggesting they'd deliberately sabotaged promising acquisition opportunities that didn't align with Patricia's investment timeline. 3 deals over the past 2 years had been abandoned after Marcus submitted negative evaluations that contradicted external consultant recommendations. In each case, Patricia's fund had taken short positions that profited from the target company's subsequent stock decline. They weren't just stealing money, they were actively damaging Meridian's competitive position to maximize their personal profits. The company I'd worked for loyally for 4 years was being systematically undermined by people in positions of trust. But discovering the financial scope of their conspiracy led me to an even more troubling realization. Operations of this complexity required inside assistance beyond what Marcus and Jennifer could provide alone. Someone else at Meridian had to be involved, someone with access to board discussions and strategic planning sessions. The answer emerged when I analyzed communication patterns between Patricia and other Meridian executives. Her email traffic showed regular correspondence with Chief Financial Officer David Chen, discussing topics that seemed suspiciously detailed for routine board communications. David had joined Meridian's leadership team 6 months before Marcus arrived, coming from a senior role at a major consulting firm. His background included extensive experience in mergers and acquisitions, making him a logical point of contact for board discussions about deal strategy. But reviewing David's emails more carefully, I found evidence of inappropriate information sharing. He'd sent Patricia detailed financial projections, competitive analysis, and strategic options that should have been restricted to senior management. The level of detail in these communications exceeded anything a board member would typically receive. Cross-referencing David's communications with Marcus's consulting activities revealed coordination that went far beyond coincidence. David would share Meridian's preliminary assessment of acquisition targets. Marcus would use that information to approach target companies with consulting services, and Patricia would adjust her investment positions accordingly. The 3 of them had created a perfect information loop. David provided intelligence from Meridian's senior management team. Patricia influenced board discussions and decisions, and Marcus monetized the information through his consulting firm while providing feedback to optimize their investment strategy. I traced their coordination through a pattern of seemingly innocent meetings at Chicago's University Club, where all three held memberships. Monthly dinners that appeared to be social networking were actually criminal conspiracy sessions where they coordinated their activities and shared profits from insider trading and consulting fraud. The University Club connection led me to discover an even broader network of professionals involved in their schemes. Other investment fund managers, boutique consulting firms, and even attorneys were participating in what amounted to a systematic corruption of Chicago's financial services industry. But the most personally devastating discovery involved my relationship with Daniel. While tracing connections between Meridian and Pinnacle Industries, I found evidence that Daniel's employment at Pinnacle wasn't coincidental. Jennifer had maintained contact with Daniel after our breakup, ostensibly offering career advice and networking opportunities. She'd recommended him for a junior analyst position at Pinnacle Industries, praising his technical skills and industry knowledge. What appeared to be friendly assistance was actually strategic recruitment. Daniel's position at Pinnacle gave him access to internal discussions about Meridian's acquisition approach. Jennifer had been systematically extracting information from him about Pinnacle's strategic planning, defensive preparations, and management sentiment regarding the potential merger. Our entire relationship had been compromised by their conspiracy. The fights about my work schedule, the pressure to discuss my projects, even our eventual breakup, all of it served their intelligence-gathering objectives. They'd manipulated my personal life to access confidential information, then positioned Daniel as an ongoing source of intelligence within Pinnacle. The betrayal cut deeper than any professional sabotage. These people hadn't just threatened my career, they'd infiltrated my personal relationships and destroyed my trust in people I'd cared about. The loneliness I'd felt over the past months wasn't just due to work stress, it was the result of calculated emotional manipulation. But discovering Daniel's unwitting participation in their scheme also provided an opportunity. If I could convince him of what was happening, he might be willing to help expose their activities from within Pinnacle Industries. His cooperation could provide the insider perspective I needed to document how Marcus's consulting firm was manipulating merger negotiations. The challenge was approaching Daniel without alerting Jennifer to my investigation. If she realized I'd uncovered their network, they might accelerate their timeline or destroy evidence before I could present it to authorities. I needed to be careful about how I gathered the final pieces of evidence. What I didn't realize was that my investigation had already been detected. While I'd been careful about accessing files and documenting evidence, I'd underestimated the sophistication of their surveillance capabilities. They knew I was getting close to the truth, and they were preparing to eliminate the threat I represented. The personal harassment and intimidation that followed would test my resolve in ways I never expected. But it would also provide the final evidence I needed to bring down their entire conspiracy and ensure they faced appropriate consequences for their crimes. The first sign that my investigation had been discovered came through my computer access logs. Routine system maintenance emails suddenly included warnings about unauthorized attempts to access restricted databases. IT support called to inform me that someone had been trying to access my files using stolen credentials, suggesting my password security might be compromised. I knew immediately this wasn't random cybercrime. Marcus and Jennifer had detected my research into their activities and were trying to determine what evidence I'd collected. The IT department recommended changing all my passwords and implementing two-factor authentication, which I did immediately. But their surveillance escalated beyond digital monitoring. Walking to my Lincoln Park apartment one evening, I noticed the same Navy sedan parked across from my building for 3 consecutive days. The driver always seemed to be reading newspapers or talking on his phone, but something about his presence felt deliberately conspicuous. My paranoia might have been dismissed as stress-induced, except for what happened next. Opening my mailbox on Thursday morning, I found an unmarked envelope containing a single sheet of paper with a typed message. Focus on your assigned work. Curiosity about matters beyond your expertise could be professionally damaging. The threat was subtle but clear. Someone wanted me to abandon my investigation and return to routine analysis of Project Sapphire. The timing suggested they knew I'd been accessing files related to Marcus's consulting activities and Patricia's investment positions. I reported the incident to Building Security, who reviewed surveillance footage but found no evidence of anyone placing materials in my mailbox. The security manager suggested the note might have been delivered through legitimate mail without postmarks making it untraceable. But the harassment continued escalating. My credit report was accessed by unauthorized parties 3 times within 2 weeks, suggesting someone was conducting background investigations into my financial stability. When I contacted the credit monitoring service, they confirmed the inquiries came from legitimate business entities but couldn't reveal which companies had requested access. The psychological pressure was becoming overwhelming. Every email could contain threats. Every phone call might be monitored. Every conversation with colleagues felt potentially dangerous. They were systematically isolating me and creating an atmosphere of constant anxiety. The situation became personal when I discovered someone had been accessing my personnel file without authorization. Human Resources contacted me about inconsistencies in my employment record, specifically noting that recent performance evaluations contradicted earlier assessments of my capabilities. Reviewing my file, I found that Marcus had submitted updated performance reviews describing my work as unreliable and suggesting I suffered from stress-related decision-making problems. The reviews contradicted years of positive feedback from other supervisors, but they'd been submitted with proper authorization and couldn't be easily challenged. Even more disturbing, Marcus had recommended that I undergo psychological evaluation to determine my fitness for handling sensitive projects. He'd cited concerns about my emotional stability and suggested that working-class background might have created insecurity issues affecting my professional judgment. The character assassination was systematic and sophisticated. Marcus was building a paper trail to support claims that I was mentally unstable, professionally incompetent, and potentially dangerous to company security. If I tried to expose their conspiracy, he could point to documented concerns about my psychological state as evidence that my accusations were delusional. But the most chilling escalation occurred when I arrived home to find my apartment had been broken into. Nothing obviously valuable was missing. My television and laptop remained untouched, but subtle signs suggested someone had conducted a thorough search. Books were repositioned on shelves, dresser drawers were slightly misaligned, and my kitchen cabinets showed fingerprints that weren't mine. Someone had spent considerable time examining my personal belongings, looking for evidence of my investigation, or materials that might incriminate them. The violation of my private space felt worse than any professional threat. These people had invaded my home, touched my personal belongings, and demonstrated they could access my life whenever they chose. The message was clear: nowhere was safe if I continued investigating their activities. But the most sophisticated element of their harassment emerged when I found tiny electronic devices hidden throughout my apartment. A small recording device was attached under my dining room table, another was concealed behind my bedroom dresser, and a third was positioned near my home office computer. The devices were professional grade, barely visible, and clearly installed by someone with surveillance experience. They'd been monitoring my private conversations, recording phone calls with family members, and capturing any discussions about work stress or Project Sapphire details. When I confronted Building Security about the break-in, the manager revealed something that made my blood run cold. 6 months earlier, a security consulting firm had conducted a comprehensive safety assessment of the building, installing upgraded monitoring systems and reviewing access protocols. The consulting firm was a subsidiary of Blackwell Strategic Advisory. Marcus had used his business connections to gain access to my building, install surveillance equipment, and monitor my private activities. The break-in wasn't random. It was a professional intelligence-gathering operation designed to intimidate me while collecting evidence for their character assassination campaign. They'd been listening to my phone conversations with my parents, recording my expressions of work-related stress, and documenting any casual mentions of project details or office frustrations. The psychological evaluation Marcus had recommended would likely reference these recordings as evidence of my instability and inability to maintain confidentiality. The sophistication of their operation was terrifying. They had resources, professional contacts, and technical capabilities far beyond what I'd expected from corporate fraud. This wasn't just white-collar crime, it was organized conspiracy involving surveillance harassment and systematic intimidation of witnesses. But their escalating harassment also revealed the desperation behind their actions. If they felt confident in their ability to frame me for their crimes, they wouldn't need such elaborate intimidation campaigns. The fact that they were investing significant resources in surveillance and character assassination suggested they viewed my investigation as a serious threat. That realization gave me hope. Despite their power and resources, they were afraid of what I might expose. The evidence I'd collected was apparently strong enough to concern them, which meant it might be sufficient to bring them to justice. However, I also understood that my personal safety was now at risk. People capable of professional surveillance and systematic harassment might escalate to more direct forms of intimidation if they felt cornered. I needed to accelerate my evidence collection and find a way to protect myself while building an airtight case against them. The next phase of their plan would test my resolve in ways I couldn't anticipate, but it would also provide the final evidence I needed to expose their conspiracy and ensure they faced appropriate consequences for their criminal activities. With my apartment under surveillance and my every move monitored, I had to develop more sophisticated methods for gathering evidence. Using public computers at the Chicago Public Library and internet cafes, I began creating multiple sets of documentation while feeding false information to test the extent of their surveillance network. I created 3 different versions of fake preliminary findings for Project Sapphire, each containing subtle inaccuracies that would reveal which person was leaking information if the false data appeared in external communications. One version suggested Pinnacle's patents were overvalued. Another indicated regulatory concerns about environmental compliance, and the third implied integration costs would exceed projections. The test worked perfectly. Within 48 hours, I found evidence that Marcus had shared the patent valuation concerns with Pinnacle's management team through his consulting firm. Jennifer had forwarded the regulatory information to her contact at Hoffman Capital Partners. Sarah from legal had apparently been feeding information to David Chen, who used the integration cost estimates in communications with board members. The false information allowed me to map their entire intelligence network with precision. Marcus was the primary conduit to external parties. Jennifer handled internal distribution. David provided access to senior management communications, and Patricia influenced board discussions. Sarah's involvement was particularly painful since I'd trusted her with information about my investigation. But discovering the full scope of their network also revealed the timeline for their final scheme. Board meeting schedules showed that Marcus would present my official Project Sapphire analysis to directors in exactly 2 weeks. The presentation would either recommend proceeding with the merger or advise against it, depending on his agenda. Cross-referencing Marcus's calendar with external consulting appointments, I found he'd already scheduled meetings with Pinnacle executives for the day after the board presentation. The meetings were described as integration planning sessions, but the timing suggested something more sinister. If the board voted to proceed with the merger based on positive recommendations, Marcus would use his consulting firm to provide Pinnacle with detailed information about Meridian's negotiating strategy, enabling them to extract better terms. If the board rejected the merger based on negative recommendations, Marcus would offer to broker alternative deal structures for substantial fees. Either way, Patricia's investment fund would profit from advanced knowledge of board decisions. They'd position themselves to make money regardless of which direction the merger discussions proceeded. But I also discovered evidence suggesting they planned to frame me for corporate espionage during the board presentation itself. Marcus had been documenting my database access patterns, creating a timeline that would suggest I'd been leaking information to external parties throughout the project. The surveillance equipment in my apartment had recorded conversations where I mentioned feeling frustrated with work assignments and uncertain about project timelines. Marcus could present these recordings as evidence of my emotional instability and potential security risk, especially if edited to remove context. Even worse, I found evidence that Jennifer had been using my network credentials to access files I'd never opened, creating an activity trail that suggested I'd been researching confidential information far beyond my Project Sapphire authorization. The false access logs would support claims that I'd been conducting unauthorized intelligence gathering for external parties. Their plan was elegant in its simplicity. Marcus would present Project Sapphire analysis to the board while simultaneously revealing concerns about information security breaches. I would be identified as the source of leaks fired for corporate espionage and potentially prosecuted for theft of trade secrets. My professional reputation would be destroyed, eliminating any credibility I might have if I tried to expose their conspiracy. Meanwhile, they would continue operating their insider trading network with a convenient scapegoat, taking responsibility for any security concerns. The psychological pressure intensified as the board meeting approached. Anonymous calls to my apartment phone featured hang-ups or background noise that suggested surveillance equipment. My work computer experienced mysterious technical problems that required IT intervention, providing additional opportunities for them to access my files. Most disturbing, I received a job inquiry from a recruiter claiming to represent a Denver-based financial services firm interested in my analytical skills. The timing and location weren't coincidental. This was clearly an attempt to gather information about my career plans and determine whether I might be planning to leave Meridian before their scheme concluded. But their surveillance also revealed something they hadn't anticipated. My investigation had uncovered enough evidence to document federal crimes, including securities fraud, insider trading, wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. If I could present this evidence to appropriate authorities, their entire network would face serious criminal prosecution. The challenge was timing. If I approached authorities too early, they might destroy evidence or accelerate their timeline. If I waited too long, they might successfully frame me for their crimes, destroying my credibility and giving them opportunity to continue their conspiracy. I decided to wait until after the board meeting to reveal my evidence. Marcus's presentation would provide additional documentation of their scheme, while his attempt to blame me for information security breaches would demonstrate the extent of their criminal conspiracy. But first, I needed to ensure my evidence would be preserved, regardless of what happened to me personally. Using secure email services and encrypted file storage, I prepared comprehensive documentation packages that would be automatically delivered to the FBI, SEC, and other appropriate authorities if I failed to log into my accounts for 72 consecutive hours. The dead man switch approach ensured that eliminating me wouldn't prevent exposure of their crimes. If they tried to harm me or destroy my evidence, the automatic delivery system would provide authorities with everything needed to pursue criminal prosecution. I also reached out to Daniel through a secure channel using a mutual friend from Northwestern to arrange a private meeting. Despite my personal feelings about how our relationship had been manipulated, I needed his cooperation to document how Marcus's consulting firm had been feeding information to Pinnacle Industries. Meeting Daniel at a coffee shop in Evanston, far from downtown Chicago, where we might be observed, I explained what I'd discovered about Jennifer's role in recruiting him and extracting information about Pinnacle's internal discussions. His shock and anger at being manipulated provided the motivation I needed to secure his cooperation. Daniel agreed to document conversations with Jennifer and provide access to internal Pinnacle communications that would prove how Marcus's consulting firm had been influencing their merger strategy. His inside perspective would be crucial for demonstrating how the conspiracy had damaged both companies' interests for personal profit. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. Marcus would present my analysis while simultaneously revealing his fabricated concerns about information security. I would be accused of corporate espionage and terminated for cause, providing perfect cover for their ongoing criminal activities. But I was ready for them. The evidence I'd collected over months of investigation would expose their conspiracy and ensure they faced appropriate consequences for their crimes. Instead of being their scapegoat, I would become their worst nightmare. The confrontation would test everything I'd learned about corporate politics, criminal justice, and personal courage. But after months of harassment and intimidation, I was prepared to fight back with everything I had. Monday morning arrived with unseasonably cold November weather, as if the atmosphere itself reflected the confrontation ahead. I dressed professionally in my navy suit, wanting to project competence and credibility when the inevitable accusations began. My evidence files were securely stored in multiple locations, and my automatic delivery system was armed and ready. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock in Meridian's executive conference room on the 42nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of downtown Chicago, while polished mahogany furniture and original artwork created an atmosphere of corporate power and authority. I arrived early to set up presentation materials, arranging my Project Sapphire analysis in perfect order while internally reviewing every detail of the evidence I'd collected. Marcus entered exactly at 10, carrying his own presentation materials and projecting confidence that suggested he felt certain of success. Patricia Hoffman took her seat at the head of the table, her designer suit and perfectly styled gray hair conveying the gravitas of someone who'd spent decades in corporate boardrooms. David Chen sat to her right, reviewing financial projections on his tablet with studied concentration. Victoria Sterling Meridian's CEO opened the meeting with standard formalities before introducing the primary agenda item. Project Sapphire represented one of Meridian's most significant strategic initiatives, with potential to transform the company's position in renewable energy markets. Marcus began his presentation with masterful confidence, outlining Pinnacle Industries' business model and competitive position in language that demonstrated his supposed expertise. He referenced my months of analysis while subtly positioning himself as the strategic architect behind all important insights. For the first 20 minutes, his presentation followed my recommendations precisely. Pinnacle's renewable energy patents represented extraordinary value. Their manufacturing capabilities were scalable, and integration synergies would create substantial shareholder benefits. The merger should proceed at recommended terms of $3 billion. But then, Marcus's tone shifted dramatically. Recent analysis had identified concerning irregularities in Pinnacle's financial reporting. He announced displaying charts that contradicted everything we'd discussed in our weekly meetings. Using insider information that could only have come from his consulting relationship with Pinnacle, Marcus highlighted revenue recognition practices that suggested aggressive accounting. He presented evidence of regulatory compliance issues that our official due diligence had missed. Most damaging, he revealed that Pinnacle's most valuable patents faced potential invalidation due to prior art challenges. Every concern Marcus raised was technically accurate, but required access to internal Pinnacle documents that weren't available through legitimate due diligence channels. He was using intelligence from his consulting firm to sabotage the merger while appearing to be protecting Meridian's interests. Patricia supported Marcus's concerns with apparent reluctance, noting that her independent research had identified similar red flags about Pinnacle's long-term viability. Her investment fund had apparently conducted extensive analysis that corroborated Marcus's findings about regulatory and legal risks. David Chen added financial projections showing that integration costs would likely exceed original estimates, particularly given the compliance issues Marcus had identified. The combined effect of their presentations was devastating to the merger's prospects. Victoria Sterling looked increasingly confused as the presentation progressed. Our previous discussions about Project Sapphire had been universally positive, with all indicators supporting the acquisition. The sudden emergence of serious concerns seemed to contradict months of careful analysis. That's when Marcus delivered his most devastating revelation. Throughout the Project Sapphire analysis, he explained there had been concerning irregularities in information security. Preliminary findings had been leaked to external parties, suggesting that someone with access to confidential materials had been sharing intelligence with unauthorized recipients. Marcus displayed system access logs showing repeated queries of databases beyond what was necessary for legitimate analysis. Someone had been researching competitive intelligence regulatory filings and strategic planning documents that weren't directly related to Pinnacle evaluation. The access logs appeared to trace back to my network credentials, suggesting I'd been the source of unauthorized intelligence gathering. Marcus presented email communications and phone records that seemed to document my contact with external parties, including consultants and investment professionals who shouldn't have access to Meridian's confidential materials. Most damaging, Marcus revealed that Pinnacle Industries had received detailed analysis of Meridian's acquisition strategy through channels that bypassed official communication protocols. The leaked intelligence had enabled Pinnacle to manipulate their financial reporting and strategic positioning to appear more attractive to acquirers. The evidence Marcus presented was sophisticated and convincing. System logs, communication records, and documentary evidence all seemed to point toward systematic information breaches that had compromised Meridian's negotiating position while potentially exposing the company to legal liability. Patricia expressed appropriate concern about the security implications, noting that insider trading regulations could result in substantial penalties if employees were found to be sharing confidential information with external parties. The SEC took such violations extremely seriously, particularly when they involved merger and acquisition activities. David Chen recommended immediate suspension of merger discussions pending a comprehensive investigation of information security breaches. The potential legal liability from continuing negotiations based on compromised intelligence could expose Meridian to regulatory sanctions and civil lawsuits. Victoria Sterling's expression shifted from confusion to anger as she processed the implications of what Marcus was presenting. If someone at Meridian had been leaking confidential information, the company's reputation and legal standing could be severely damaged. That's when Marcus recommended my immediate suspension pending investigation of the security breaches. The evidence strongly suggested that I had been the source of unauthorized intelligence sharing, whether through negligence, inexperience, or deliberate misconduct. Security personnel were already positioned outside the conference room, ready to escort me from the building, while IT staff secured my computer and files for forensic analysis. The speed and coordination of their response suggested this had been planned in advance. But as Marcus concluded his presentation with apparent reluctance about having to expose a colleague's misconduct, my phone buzzed with a text message that changed everything. The message was from Daniel Emergency. Pinnacle CEO just called all-hands meeting. Says someone at Meridian leaked our internal documents to competitors. They're accusing you of corporate espionage. They received forged documents with your digital signature attached. My blood froze as I realized the full scope of Marcus's plan. He hadn't just stolen my analysis and sabotaged the merger. He'd forged my authorization on documents leaked to Pinnacle's competitors, making me appear guilty of corporate espionage from both sides. Pinnacle Industries would blame me for leaking their confidential information to competitors, while Meridian would accuse me of sharing their strategic intelligence with Pinnacle. I'd be caught in the middle of mutual accusations that would destroy my career and potentially result in criminal prosecution. As security approached my chair, Victoria Sterling looked at me with disappointment that cut deeper than any professional setback I'd experienced. The CEO I'd hoped to impress with my analytical skills now viewed me as a security threat who'd betrayed the company's trust. But I wasn't finished yet. Marcus had made one crucial mistake in his elaborate scheme. By forging my digital signature and authorization codes, he'd provided me with the final evidence I needed to expose his conspiracy. Standing calmly as security reached for my arm, I requested permission to address the board about urgent legal matters that required immediate attention. What I was about to reveal would not only clear my name, but expose the most sophisticated corporate fraud scheme in Meridian's history. The next few minutes would determine whether justice prevailed or whether Marcus's conspiracy succeeded in destroying both my career and the integrity of Meridian's strategic planning process. As security officers positioned themselves beside my chair, I stood calmly and addressed Victoria Sterling directly. Before you escort me from this building, I need 5 minutes to present evidence of federal crimes that threaten not just this merger, but the integrity of our entire organization. The confidence in my voice apparently surprised everyone, including Marcus, whose expression shifted from triumphant satisfaction to concerned uncertainty. Victoria Sterling raised her hand to pause the security officers, her business instincts recognizing that something significant was about to unfold. I have spent the past 4 months documenting a conspiracy involving securities fraud, insider trading, corporate espionage, and breach of fiduciary duty that reaches to the highest levels of this organization. I announced, pulling out carefully organized evidence folders that I'd prepared for this moment. Marcus attempted to interrupt, suggesting that anything I presented was likely fabricated to cover my own misconduct. But Victoria Sterling silenced him with a sharp gesture. She wanted to hear what I had to say before making final decisions about my employment and potential prosecution. Opening my primary evidence folder, I began with Marcus's consulting firm and its inappropriate relationship with acquisition targets. I displayed bank records showing payments from Pinnacle Industries to Blackwell Strategic Advisory dating back 14 months long before Meridian's official interest in acquiring them. The consulting contracts proved that Marcus had been selling competitive intelligence to companies that Meridian was evaluating for acquisition. He'd been playing both sides of every deal, collecting fees from Meridian for strategic analysis, while simultaneously selling insights to target companies for substantial additional compensation. But the financial fraud was just the beginning. I presented evidence of Jennifer's fraudulent employment application, revealing that she'd concealed her marriage to Marcus while using her administrative access to collect confidential information across multiple departments. Cross-referencing Jennifer's database queries with Marcus's consulting activities demonstrated systematic intelligence gathering that had compromised every major strategic initiative over the past 18 months. They'd been stealing proprietary information, sharing it with competitors and acquisition targets, and profiting from insider knowledge while sabotaging Meridian's competitive position. The board members' expressions shifted from skepticism to alarm as I presented documentation of Patricia Hoffman's investment fund and its suspicious trading patterns. Hoffman Capital Partners had taken strategic positions in every company that subsequently became Meridian acquisition targets, generating millions in profits from advanced knowledge of board discussions. Patricia attempted to defend her investment decisions as legitimate market analysis, but the timing and precision of her trades made coincidence impossible. She'd been using her board position to conduct insider trading while simultaneously influencing merger decisions to maximize her personal profits. Most damaging, I revealed the offshore account structure that Marcus, Jennifer, and Patricia had created to share profits from their conspiracy. Shell companies in Bermuda and the Cayman Islands had been receiving payments that flowed through multiple corporate entities before reaching accounts controlled by the conspirators. The sophistication of their money laundering operations suggested professional assistance and years of development. This wasn't opportunistic fraud, it was organized criminal enterprise designed to systematically loot Meridian's strategic planning process for personal gain. David Chen's face had gone pale as I presented evidence of his role in providing confidential information to support their insider trading activities. Email communications showed him sharing detailed financial projections and strategic assessments that enabled Patricia to time her investment decisions with perfect precision. But the most shocking revelation involved the surveillance and harassment campaign they'd conducted against me when my investigation threatened their operations. I displayed photos of the recording devices found in my apartment documentation of unauthorized credit checks and evidence that Marcus's consulting firm had gained access to my building under false pretenses. They'd been monitoring my private conversations, documenting my personal activities, and building a psychological profile to support claims that I was mentally unstable and prone to security breaches. The harassment wasn't just intimidation, it was evidence tampering designed to undermine my credibility as a witness. The forged digital signatures that Marcus had used to leak documents while implicating me provided the final proof of their criminal intent. Technical analysis showed that the forged authorizations had been created using Marcus's computer and network access, demonstrating that he'd been conducting corporate espionage while framing me for his crimes. Victoria Sterling's expression had transformed from disappointed authority to focused investigator as she processed the implications of my evidence. She immediately contacted the FBI and SEC while instructing corporate security to detain Marcus, Jennifer, and Patricia pending law enforcement arrival. Marcus attempted to dismiss my evidence as fabrication and revenge, but the documentary proof was overwhelming. Bank records, email communication system access logs, and forensic evidence from surveillance equipment created an unshakable case of organized criminal conspiracy. Patricia tried to leave the conference room claiming urgent business commitments, but security officers blocked her exit, while Victoria Sterling explained that federal investigators would need to interview all board members about their knowledge of insider trading activities. Jennifer's reaction was the most revealing. Instead of denying involvement, she immediately began negotiating for cooperation with authorities in exchange for reduced charges. Her willingness to provide additional evidence against Marcus and Patricia confirmed that the conspiracy was even more extensive than my investigation had revealed. Within 2 hours, federal agents had arrived to take control of the crime scene, while SEC investigators began securing financial records and digital evidence. The speed of their response suggested they'd been monitoring suspicious trading patterns around Meridian's acquisition activities for some time. The board voted unanimously to proceed with the Pinnacle Industries merger at my originally recommended terms, recognizing that Marcus's sabotage had been designed to benefit his co-conspirators rather than protect Meridian's interests. The deal's fundamentals remained sound, despite their attempts at manipulation. Pinnacle's CEO, grateful for the exposure of the intelligence leaks that had been compromising his company's strategic planning, agreed to expedited merger negotiations that would complete the transaction within 60 days, rather than the originally planned 6-month timeline. Marcus's consulting firm was raided that afternoon, with federal agents discovering additional evidence of similar schemes involving multiple clients across the financial services industry. His criminal network extended far beyond Meridian, suggesting years of systematic fraud that had affected numerous companies and thousands of investors. Patricia faced immediate resignation from all board positions as federal investigators froze her investment accounts and began tracing the flow of insider trading profits through her offshore entities. The scope of her violations would likely result in decades of prison time and forfeiture of all assets derived from criminal activities. Jennifer's cooperation with authorities revealed the technical details of their surveillance operations, leading to additional charges for invasion of privacy, stalking, and witness intimidation. The harassment campaign they'd conducted against me constituted serious federal crimes beyond their financial fraud. Within 30 days, all 3 conspirators had been indicted on multiple felony charges, including securities fraud, money laundering, racketeering, and violation of fiduciary duty. The evidence I'd collected formed the foundation of the federal case that would ultimately result in substantial prison sentences for each defendant. The personal impact was transformative. Victoria Sterling promoted me to Vice President of Strategic Analysis with equity participation in the merged company, recognizing that my investigation had saved Meridian from massive financial losses and regulatory sanctions. The Pinnacle merger closed successfully at $3.2 billion, creating substantial value for shareholders while positioning the combined company as a leader in renewable energy technology. My original analysis had been validated, proving that my working-class background enhanced rather than limited my analytical capabilities. Daniel and I reconciled professionally, though our romantic relationship remained in the past. He transferred to the merged company's renewable energy division, where his technical expertise complemented the strategic initiatives we'd developed. Our friendship had been tested by manipulation, but it survived because we'd both been victims rather than willing participants. The experience taught me that competence and integrity ultimately triumph over corruption and manipulation, but only when good people have the courage to fight back against injustice. I'd learned that my worth wasn't defined by others' sabotage, but by my commitment to truth and ethical conduct. 6 months later, I was leading the integration team for the successfully merged companies, creating innovations in renewable energy that transformed both organizations. Marcus was serving 18 months in federal prison for securities fraud, with additional charges pending in other jurisdictions. The story ends with me in my new corner office reviewing proposals from junior analysts and ensuring that every voice is heard and every contribution recognized. I've implemented mentorship programs to prevent other employees from suffering the professional sabotage I endured. Looking back on that moment when I stood in the conference room facing false accusations and career destruction, I realized that fighting for truth required more courage than I knew I possessed. But the alternative, accepting injustice and allowing criminals to profit from their schemes, was unacceptable. Corporate America isn't perfect, but it can work when people are willing to stand up for what's right. Sometimes the little guy really can win, especially when she's armed with evidence determination and refusal to accept that working-class background makes her less capable than privileged colleagues. The most satisfying moment came 6 months after the merger, when Marcus called from federal prison asking for character references to support his early release application. I politely declined, noting that I was just operations support and couldn't possibly provide valuable insights about executive-level performance. Have you ever been underestimated at work because of your background or position? How did you prove your worth and fight back against those who tried to hold you down? Share your story in the comments below and let me know if this resonated with your experience in corporate America. Thank you for listening to my story about fighting back against corruption and proving that integrity and hard work can triumph over manipulation and fraud. I hope it inspires you to stand up for what's right in your own professional journey. If this story motivated you to believe in the power of truth over deception, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming workplace challenges and fighting corporate injustice. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters, regardless of their background or position. Remember, you're never just anything. You're exactly who you need to be to make a difference when it matters most.